found in Christianity, Judaism, Hermeticism, Taoism, Hinduism, Wiccan practices, alchemy, science, music. You see these patterns in society. They use phi and the golden mean to map out different cycles in the economy. These are not just symbols of alchemy. They're not Masonic symbols, of the Freemasons or the Illuminati. They're not Christian symbols. They're not Hebrew symbols. They're not Mayan symbols, although you can find them throughout all of those different cultures. They're just universal symbols of creation, of reality. Okay, beautiful souls. Tonight we're going to talk about the shapes of sacred geometry, Fibonacci spirals, and the underlying patterns of the nature of reality, and then we'll bring it back around and show how these things relate to the symbols in our dreams. The whole point is to really help people understand the fundamental nature of dreams, but dreams are a part of our reality. This quote is from Ezekiel chapter 10, verses 9 through 13. All four wheels looked alike, each like a wheel within a wheel. When they moved, they went in any of the four directions, but in a perfectly straight line. Where the cherubim went, the wheels went straight ahead. The cherubim were full of eyes in their backs, hands, and wings. It might sound crazy, and I'm not sure how many of you have seen the visual depictions of Ezekiel's wheel or his angel. But it's mind-boggling, honestly, and it's one of those things that makes you question the validity of the Bible. But looking at what we're going to talk about today, it makes a lot of sense. The shapes that we're talking about can be seen in mandalas, yantras, crop circles, the yin-yang, right here. That's why I wore this shirt. Dream catchers. You can see it in plants, shells, flowers, the Vitruvian Man, all of that. These shapes are ubiquitous, and through understanding and observing it and partaking in it, there's a deeper wisdom you can get from it. If you do any type of art, you can feel the shape of it. It's almost like alchemy. You're transforming the energy of your thoughts into something that can be viewed by other people, and there's a deep sense of satisfaction about that. You could see these cycles and these shapes conceptually in different ways, even like through music and the structure of story. Even in hurricanes, tornadoes, from atoms to black holes to solar systems. Before we really get into the shapes and the geometry of it, I think it's important to talk about the scientific laws of nature as we understand them. You'll see how every single one of these laws applies to every principle that we're going to talk about. And it's not a stretch. It's not hard. It's not hard to make these connections. These connections are so obvious. There's a lot of conspiracies that a lot of this information has been hidden over time. How much of that is true? I think it's been sensationalized, but there's definitely some truth to that, and we'll talk about that. To hopefully help everyone see how all of these things connect, I want to keep the trajectory. I think it's good to acknowledge Newton's laws of motion. The first law is the law of inertia, and I think most people understand what inertia is. The second law is the law of acceleration. The third law is the law of action and reaction. Everything is in motion. Inertia, acceleration, action and reaction, and motion. I think we all understand that everything is always in motion. And I said this to my son the other day, and he said, even a rock that sits there, and he's like, what if nobody touches it? But the point is that at a molecular level, a cellular level, there is motion to it. Not only are the atoms comprised of parts that are in motion, but the rock itself is on top of a much bigger rock that is in motion. And that big rock, which is our planet Earth, is in a solar system that has its own motion. And so the point is that everything is in motion. Nothing ever stays the same. Everything is either growing or decaying. And when there is no motion, there is no existence. We don't know of anything that can exist without some type of motion. Not only at the the cosmic level, but also at the quantum level. The next scientific law is the law of universal gravitation, and that just describes the attractive force between two masses. Actually, we'll get into that once we get to relativity, but first let's talk about the laws of thermodynamics. The first one is the law of conservation of energy, and that is just that everything is energy, and energy can't come from nowhere. Everything has to have a counterpart that it was created from. Energy can never be created or destroyed, and then absolute zero. And this, we'll bring this up again later on because this gets really interesting. Then there's Maxwell's equations, which a lot of you are relatively familiar with, I'm sure. They describe the behavior of electric and magnetic fields. And as we understand electromagnetism as one force that's embodied in different ways. So again, just everything has to come from something. Everything has an energetic counterpart, an equivalent of it that it had to have come from. What's most exciting to me is where the general theory of relativity applies. Space-time, as we understand it, is the conceptual grid that we put on the space around us. This is a two-dimensional representation of the fabric of space-time. In order to conceptually understand the space around us, scientists lay it out as a two-dimensional grid. What Einstein's relativity says is that Earth does not have a gravitational pull as we like to think of it, but the feeling of that gravity is the curvature of space-time. And one of the best analogies that I've seen for it is they throw like a bowling ball in the middle of a trampoline, and the bowling ball sinks down in the middle, obviously. And that trampoline represents the fabric of space-time. So the bowling ball creates a curvature in that space-time, the mass of that bowling ball. And then as things enter closer to that bowling ball, they can get pulled into that and rotate around that. Then you have to think of the fabric of that space-time as going in all dimensions and all directions. And that's tough for us to conceptually understand. The point is that that grid that we see as space-time that is mapped out, it almost looks like a net. Mass creates a curvature in this space-time, and that's what creates this force that we know as gravity. A lot of these symbols that we're going to talk about are found in ancient Egypt, and actually some of them even predate ancient Egypt. But the Egyptians, their gods were not called gods, they were not called deities. What their gods literally translated to was, they were called the masters of the net. You can see this net or this grid that they drew behind their art. And I think it's fair to say, which a lot of obviously the Egyptologists just say, that they were using that grid to proportion their drawings, obviously, and that makes sense too, and I'm sure they can be used for that. But the fact that they literally had a goddess named Neith, or Neith, I'm not sure how to say it, Neith, and she was associated with weaving, and she was associated with the creation of the universe. And then they also had the god Atum, Atum, was their ultimate creator god. Their gods were masters of the net. They used this net, this grid, in a lot of their artwork, and a lot of their depictions were drawn on this net or this grid. We understand now from Einstein's theory of relativity, we use that conceptually to understand the curvature of space-time. You could also think of, we use the grid on the Earth, and that's another way of looking at it. And then scientists also have their own sky grid that they use to understand the stars and stuff. They make a conceptual grid, an imaginary grid on the sky, but come to find these things are not so imaginary. The idea of fractals is that there's something that can be represented infinitely on a small scale or a large scale. You can make a square and put any amount of squares inside of that, and put any amount of squares inside of that infinitely. Especially the Mandelbrot set, the actual equations for that fractal, they show the pattern of the growth of branches and root systems and the human circulatory system. The point of fractals is that they're basically simple formulas mapped onto complex planes. infinitely larger or infinitely smaller. Fractals tie into the golden ratio, also known as phi, or golden mean, or the divine proportion. And the golden ratio is derived from the Fibonacci sequence. Just to explain it mathematically and simply, A plus B always equals C on a given line. And if you multiply the length of C by phi, you get the same exact mirror image, but larger. So phi is special in that way. And it represents the duality constantly chasing the unity, the Fibonacci sequence. 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 1 equals 3, 3 plus 2 equals 5. It oscillates constantly over and under as its ratio, but it never quite reaches it. And it'll continue infinitely smaller or infinitely larger, but it'll never quite reach it. And I really do think that this represents the paradox of reality. We can feel nature constantly striving towards unity, but as far as like physically in this three-dimensional existence, infinity, like in our imagination we can comprehend it, but there's no way to depict it directly. Consciousness, light, is existence, but as far as we understand it, we can have no existence without both. But our observation and experiential existence comes from light. And again, like I said, everything is in motion. If something's not in motion, then as far as we understand it, it does not exist. So in sacred geometry, you have void, nothingness, as far as we can understand that. And you start out with the most basic, simple thing that is a single point. And because there's nothing else to act on this from any other direction, that point is a perfect circle, or a sphere. Again, all these things we're talking about, we can talk about them two-dimensionally, three-dimensionally, and then we'll get into higher dimensions. But it is picture a circle. And because existence or observation is not possible in unity, and we can picture this circle, you know, the point of concentration, the singularity point, everything compressed into one. But true experiential existence isn't possible from a single unity. The only way that something can actually have experience is to have something else to compare to for that experience. I think intuitively most of us can understand that. You know, so they say that spirit was a single point. And then in order to be able to experience itself, and because motion is the foundation of existence, it has to move. So from that one single point, or that one single circle, just like how cells divide, that circle divides. Because if one thing existed, there can be no motion, because there's nothing for it to move away from or to move to. So the only way that something can have motion, and motion is necessary for existence, is for that thing to have something else. So it divides just as a cell divides. So then you get two circles that divide, but they're still touching. So when you get two circles that overlap, in between you get Vesica Pisces. And it's called that, I believe it means the bladder of a fish, because I guess it resembles the shape of a fish's bladder. It's the first proposition of Euclid's Elements, so it's foundational in geometry. It's what a lot of mathematicians use to form the first step when they're constructing an equilateral triangle. And also you could think about the Eye of Horus. You know, the Eye of Horus also fits this shape if you want to move it horizontally. And then the Eye of Horus has all types of different mathematical properties to it that the Egyptians used. When you look at a helix from the side, the DNA strands, you'll find the shape of the Vesica Pisces all throughout there, depending on your vantage point to that. If you keep adding these circles, because existence has to stay in motion, it balances itself out if we keep those scientific laws that we talked about in the beginning in mind. It's going to find a balance. It's going to find a counterbalance. So it creates circles all around the one circle. After you get 6 circles around a circle intersecting at the points where they meet, and the next circle starts from that, From that you get the seed of life, or it's known as the Genesis pattern. And what's interesting about that is that they all balance each other perfectly. It is a balanced shape. And Genesis says that the earth was created in 6 days. Of course, the 7th day was for rest, and this is a figure with 7 circles. The flower of life is an image that's been seen all over the world. I think some of the earliest depictions, from what they say, not that their dating is all accurate, but it's been seen in Egypt inscriptions all the way back to 1500 BC. The Egyptians carved this symbol into the Temple of Karnak. It's also been found in Iceland, England, Tibet, Ireland, Israel, Greece, Turkey, and China. It is one of the most prominent symbols throughout all of human history. You can find it everywhere. It looks a lot like the original cells of a fertilized egg, and as we go through these shapes, they look more and more like the complexities of a fertilized egg. And from that shape, you can get the fruit of life. And so far, everything has existed in curves, and just like as we understand it, the shapes of our planets and the shapes of black holes and everything, nature is curved. And just like there's a duality with everything, and just like we were talking about, just to make existence possible, everything works in binary sequences. All of the information that's contained in every computer comes through binary sequences, and that's why I love the yin yang so much. That's why it means so much to me. You can't have up without down. You can't have in without out. You can't have hard without soft. You can't have light without dark. You can't give without receiving. You can't have a spirit without a body. You can't have big without small, and you can't have straight without curved. Now, with that being said, because we're working with nothing but circles here, if you start to draw straight lines, that's when you get some of the biggest revelations of existence. And generally, in nature, as we understand it, they associate curved with female. And even generally, if you look at it, females have more curved bodies, and the male part is the straight lines. And that's literally just how there's a male and a female and a light and a dark to everything. It's just the duality. Generally, male, analytical, straightforward, females more emotional and free-flowing. So in order to really find the magic here, you have to have both parts, both sides of the coin, in order to really understand the existence of these shapes. And just like you can't have something without nothing, the counterpart to these circles is the straight lines. So as you start to connect the dots, literally, you start to find some of the most profound shapes. This is where you get Metatron's cube, which we've talked about a lot in the past, and a lot of people refer to this as squaring the circle, or you can circle the square. But before we talk about Metatron's cube, just to run through that again real quick, you have a single point, then you get 2 circles in the Vesica Pisces. Let's not forget when you add the 3rd circle, that can represent the Holy Trinity. Then after 6 circles, you get the seed of life. Add some more circles, you get the flower of life. And out of the flower of life comes the fruit of life. Then we want to connect those dots, because it's nothing but round dots at this point. And so we talk about the lines, duality. You have hot and cold. And also what's interesting is that heat is energy. Heat is light. Cold doesn't actually exist. Cold is the lack of heat. There is no such force as cold. Cold is not an energy. Cold is the lack of energy. So, it is the perfect counterpart of heat. And energy is motion and light. Without light, there's no observation, and without motion, there's no light. So it's existence and non-existence. Duality is necessary. So with these circles, we have to draw straight lines. And also, you can think of a waking life and your dreams. You have to draw these lines to connect the circles. That's the duality. It's the duality in the unity, and we use this duality to find the unity. So then you get into the main principles of sacred geometry, which is the Platonic solids. And these figures are named after Plato, obviously, but they predate Plato. I think Plato was around 400 BC, but these go back to ancient Babylonia. These Platonic solids are the basic building blocks of nature. They're the shapes that we find all throughout nature, even and in the periodic table of elements as well. The main significance of the Platonic solids is that they're the only shapes in existence that have faces that are all the same size, edges that are all the same length, and angles that are all the same degree. If you put it inside of a sphere, like we were talking about, the perfect shape of unity, that sphere, if you put this shape inside of a sphere, all of the points will touch the edge of the sphere. There's no other shapes that we know of in existence that meets all of these properties. These are the only 5 shapes that meet that. And then extensions of these shapes come in the form of the star tetrahedron and Metatron's cube, which we will get into. So the first Platonic solid is called the hexahedron, and it's called a hexahedron because it has 6 square faces, but it's basically just a cube. All of these correspond with different chakras, and they all correspond with different elements of nature. So the cube in sacred geometry represents the earth, or the root chakra, so being grounded. You know, it's one of the most basic shapes here. So the next shape is the icosahedron. That is a figure with 20 triangular faces. That corresponds with the sacral chakra and with the water element. And it represents intuition and adaptation, things like that. The next shape is the octahedron, and that is 8 triangular faces. That corresponds with air and freedom and communication. And then we have the dodecahedron, also known as the pentagonal dodecahedron. That corresponds with ether or prana, and that has 12 pentagonal faces. The tetrahedron is a pyramid. So just to run through again real quick. There's the hexahedron, which is a cube. There's the icosahedron, which is 20 triangular faces. The tetrahedron, which is a pyramid. There's the octahedron, which is 8 triangular faces. And there's the dodecahedron, 12 pentagonal faces. Professor Robert Moon from the University of Chicago actually showed how every element on the periodic table of elements, every one of their properties can correspond to one of these Platonic solids. To go back to the tetrahedron, which is the pyramid, if you take that pyramid, add another one and invert it, you get the Merkaba, or the Star of David, it looks like. You know, and it's a very prominent symbol in Jewish mysticism. The word Merkaba translates to chariot, so I thought that was interesting, almost for travel. And in sacred geometry, the Merkaba is understood as the 3-dimensional version of that star tetrahedron, that Star of David shape. And they believe that it surrounds the body, and it is the male interpretation of the aura. They believe that the shape of the energy that surrounds the body takes this shape. It depends on how you look at it. You know, there can be the sphere of energy around us, and then within that sphere is the Merkaba. So you find these straight lines and these circles. Once you add those circles onto the flower of life, and you start to connect those dots, you can make Metatron's cube. And we've talked about this a lot in the past, because this is the one that interests me the most. It is more complex than all of the Platonic solids. And understand that Metatron's cube is not one of the Platonic solids. The point of the Platonic solids is that they're the building blocks. They're the most basic, down to the core shapes that you can come up with. You know, if you have 2 points, you only have a line. You know, you can't get a conceptual shape from that. So You know, in order for existence to keep reaching out and to keep expanding and experiencing itself in different ways, you have to keep adding points. So the first most basic point you get is the triangle, and then the next most basic point you get is the square, and then you keep going up and till you get shapes that don't mirror each other's properties. Advancing on the Platonic solids, you get Metatron's cube, and it's also found in the Flower of Life by connecting the dots. And if you take this into a 3D form and show it depicted as a 3D form, it's really interesting. Because Metatron's cube is really where the feminine meets the masculine. You know, it's like the unity of duality, kind of. So it's the 13 circles in the Flower of Life connected with straight lines. Every one of those circles in the Flower of Life connected with straight lines gets you the Metatron's cube. And Metatron's cube contains all of the Platonic solids. It could represent that next dimension, the dimension beyond what's physically observable for us. You get all Platonic solids from Metatron's cube. It's known in sacred geometry as the blueprint of creation. The images of Metatron's cube and the depictions of Metatron go all the way back to ancient Judaism, but they can also be found in not only Orthodox Judaism, but in heretical Judaism, so they have disagreements there. It's also found in Christianity and Islamic traditions, and but one of the earliest mentions of it is in the Jewish mystical tradition of the Kabbalah. And it's also been mentioned in the Babylonian Talmud, which is a collection of texts from Judaism that were kind of, I believe, intentionally left out of the King James Bible. I believe mainly it was probably left out of the Bible because it emphasizes divine dualism, you know, and the King James Bible kind of wanted to focus on one single unified creator deity, when Metatron's cube, the symbol of it, kind of really represents that unity coming through duality. Metatron himself, though, as a character, is known as the highest archangel, or one of the highest leagues of archangels. He was the celestial scribe for the Book of Life, for all of the decisions that man made. Mentions of this go back to the Talmud. According to these traditions, he was a guide to humanity, and also he was known as the voice of God, or the speaker of God, or the translator for God, because in these traditions, man cannot stand the power of God's voice. God's voice is too powerful for man. So and I really think, like, conceptually, this could represent how our human brains can't quite conceive infinity. And we're trying to imagine something that's infinite, but we're using a finite brain. I really feel like Metatron's cube is a hyperdimensional figure shape that we look at, and it kind of gives us a glimpse of what this higher reality could be. Him being the guide of humanity and the voice of God, because we can't understand God and he helps us understand God. I see a lot of relations there. From the Book of Parables, I know he was shown as two separate entities, the Son of Man and Enoch. But then by the end of the Book of Parables, if you read it, you'll see that they show that he was one by the end of it. So in the beginning, it's strange, and some of the writing is a little bit like it's a little tough to follow, in my opinion. But in the beginning, they're talking of the Son of Man, and they're talking of Enoch, who is obviously higher than the Son of Man. And then by the end of the story, they're only referring to Enoch, as if the Son of Man and Enoch had kind of merged into one. Some people argue that Enoch is the angelic version of the Son of Man in that story, and Again, the reason that's significant is because Metatron represents the counterpart, the spiritual plane just above this physical plane, because it encompasses all the shapes of this physical plane in a hyperdimensional shape. When you draw lines and connect every single dot in the flower of life, you get Metatron's cube. At the pictures, picture number 35 is a picture of Buckminster Fuller, and I thought that he was necessary to talk about because he brought up he discovered, if you want to call it that, the vector equilibrium, which is found in Metatron's cube, and it's another significant shape. And just to go talk about Buckminster Fuller for a minute, he was an architect who came up with the shape of a geodesic dome, and that is a dome that evenly distributes pressure. And I'm sure you've seen this. It's basically a perfect dome that's made out of a bunch of tiny triangles. And so that's a significant shape, and it's used a lot in architecture and in other things. But he came up with the vector equilibrium, which is a 3D version of the shape which is found within Metatron's cube. If you turn this into a 3D model, which he did, it looks like it's basically made from putting triangles and squares together at each other's corners of the same length. You come up with this shape. And again, it's interesting to note that triangles and squares are the two most basic shapes you can make from a single point. When you start to branch out, first two shapes you get is the triangle and the square. And what's significant about this is that this is the most stable polyhedron that humans know of, because every line is the same distance from each point, including the center point. How's everyone doing out there? Anyone watching the replay, let me know if this is making sense so far. Keep the ball rolling. We're talking about motion, movement, lines, and we're talking about curves. A vibration is what creates all of this motion that we're talking about from the beginning. I think it's interesting to note that every one of these shapes that I've mentioned before, the mandalas, the crop circles, everything, these same shapes are found in cymatics and harmonics, which you also find at the cellular level. To understand not just the geometry of harmonics, but also the cymatics, when they play a frequency into water, the water takes these sacred geometric shapes. So, and then also, we've talked about before, Masaru Emoto. If you play certain music or think certain thoughts or say certain things or write certain words on bottles of water and then freeze it and take pictures of the frozen crystals, you can see that they take these same shapes, these sacred geometric shapes found everywhere in nature. Nature is constantly striving towards these patterns. I want to talk about Keith Critchlow, who was a man who mapped a triangle with straight lines and found that each successive proportion was the harmonic mean between the previous proportion and the total length. So then this shows exactly how harmonics are significant to shapes. To put it simply, and you know, there's lots of videos that go into depth on this, but basically mapping the harmonics of music showed that they were related to the proportions of the central line that moves through a tetrahedron. So you can find all known harmonic systems from this tetrahedron shape. It also represents the shape of phi, like we were talking about before. So music scales follow the same exact pattern, which might explain why those sounds, different frequencies, take the shape when they vibrate this water. They can also do it with a plate with sand on top. It's just that the sound vibrates into this shape. I want to add some quick video clips here to show some examples of this. You can even get creative and test this yourself. I wanted to mention the Kundalini. And again, we've talked about Kundalini a lot before too. Let me check what time it is real quick. Okay, not bad. We're not doing too bad so far. Kundalini is known as the divine energy at the base of the spine. If we keep the chakras in mind throughout all of this, it's known in Hinduism as the serpent energy at the base of the spine. And there's something about serpent energy that I find interesting, and I don't think that there's anything demonic about it in any type of way. They call the first stage of our brain the reptilian brain, so there could be something about the serpent energy being the first step towards consciousness, and that's just something I'm throwing out there. Kundalini is the coil, or the coiled up divine feminine energy at the base of the spine. It also emulates or looks a lot like the golden spiral once it starts reaching up the spine. Also looks a lot like the DNA strands, the helix in DNA strands, and it also looks like the staff of Hermes with the two snakes that are intertwined going up it. And Hermeticism and Hermetic philosophy is based around all of these same exact symbols. And Hermeticism is an ancient practice. So, but the Kundalini is from Hinduism, and in yoga they imagine it as their energy that flows up the spine and connects them with higher dimensions. Our base, our root chakra, keeps us grounded to the earth, and our crown chakra connects us with higher things. And it can help to think of it like literally from the ground to the sky, but I think it's ultra dimensionally. I think it's a lot more than that. But regardless, and I think that has to do with our crown chakra being closer to our eyes, which are experiencing this light. But that's something else. The Kundalini was first mentioned in the Upanishads, which is a weird one. I tried to look up a bunch of different ways to say it, but a few people called it the Upanishads, so I'll call it that, which were a collection of Tibetan and Buddhist practices that were written between 500 and 1000 BC. Just an interesting note, that this follows the chakra system, and a lot of the depictions in art show the Kundalini traveling up the line. Yes, Cliff, you said wave shape? Yeah, exactly. It's found in waves. It's mapped out everywhere. And then there's, it also depends on your vantage point, but all of these shapes, they're found in Christianity, Judaism, Hermeticism, Taoism, Hinduism, Wiccan practices, alchemy, science, music. You see these patterns in society. They use phi and the golden mean to map out different cycles in the economy. You see it in math, you see it in art. And humans are just naturally drawn to patterns. We're drawn to routines and to patterns. It's these are not just symbols of alchemy. They're not Masonic symbols, of the Freemasons or the Illuminati. They're not Christian symbols. They're not Hebrew symbols. They're not Mayan symbols, although you can find them throughout all of those different cultures. They're just universal symbols of creation, of reality. And I really feel like if someone gets really deep into the symbolism of their religion and they start connecting these dots and they start seeing, whether it's in Hinduism or the Kabbalah or in Buddhism is a lot of it, every one of these religions throughout history that uses these symbols, they might see the connections in these symbols, and it all makes sense conceptually and mathematically and intuitively, and that might convince them that they've found the right religion. But as far as I'm concerned, it's still just a bunch of different ways of trying to say the same things. So, when people talk about the pyramid in the Illuminati and Freemasonry, that it doesn't belong to them. It's just that they understood the significance of it, like many other cultures historically. The symbolism, or the symbol for Freemasons, the compass that you use to draw a perfect circle, and they talk about how Freemasons have a lot of the hidden occultic knowledge and secrets to humanity. Just interesting, they're universal symbols, and also I'm not sure, like, depending on how familiar you are with it, but I know a lot of people who have psychedelic experiences. Throughout those experiences, they see these same shapes. They come back and describe these same shapes. And I know that I had one intense psychedelic experience, and I was in a matrix, and there was definitely spheres. I was flying through what felt like the fabric of reality, or space-time, And the interesting thing about, we can connect duality with space-time again, because scientifically we understand space and time as inseparable, but you can observe them separately. So it's the duality in the unity. Just like quantum physicists recognize that everything can be understood through waves or through particles, depending on how you choose to look at it. Even light has particles, and they're called photons. Or you can understand light simply through wavelengths, and that ties back to everything we've talked about. The toroidal field is also a subject that fits into these patterns, but I might save that for its own video. The concept of duality also, you got two hemispheres in one brain, or in one head. You can't escape the duality, but you cannot escape the unity either. If anyone's watching in the future, you can leave me comments, especially over on YouTube, if you can think of any other places in nature where Fibonacci might be applied. Like some things off the top of my head, I think of fingerprints, or the rings of tree. Nature is always reaching towards this unity. That's just about it. That was fun. And if anyone has any questions in the future, hit me up. I will be referencing this video, I'm sure. Then maybe, I'm not sure what we're going to get into next week, but we might talk about how to look for some of these symbols in your dream. Like, I know my sister, a while ago, she was talking about a dream where someone was standing underneath an arch, a white arch. And, colors and wavelengths and the significance of and symbolism of colors could be its own video again. But it would definitely relate a lot to this. But I just couldn't fit everything in tonight. Like, if you're looking for a way to translate the symbolism, I think it's important to understand sacred geometry and the basis of a lot of these symbols and these geometric shapes. So that's going to be it. Cheers, everyone. I hope every single one of you has an amazing night. And yeah, I'm going to call it. Peace, love, unity, duality, all that good stuff. Thank you, everyone.